Have you ever looked up one day and realized someone who once felt so close was suddenly gone? Not after a huge fight, not after some dramatic goodbye, but through a silence so clean it almost felt unreal? That is the part that unsettles people the most. There is no loud ending, no last emotional speech, no slammed door. Just a slow fade you somehow missed while it was happening right in front of you. And when you finally feel the distance, it is already complete. That is what makes this so hard to understand. You are not shocked only because they left. You are shocked because you never saw the leaving begin. But here is the truth most people miss. Some people do not walk away in one moment. They leave in layers, quietly, internally, piece by piece. Long before their body is gone, their heart has already started stepping back. And if you miss the early signs, the final silence feels brutal. Stay with me, because what looks sudden from the outside is often the last scene of a very long emotional process, and the deeper reason is not what most people think. Most people assume highly sensitive people are easy to read. They imagine that if something hurts them, you will see it right away. They think pain always shows on the face, in the voice, in the argument, in the reaction. But that is not always how this works. Some people do not react first. They process first. They do not move through life by judging one moment at a time. They read patterns. They hold emotional details. They remember tone, timing, effort, absence, and the feeling behind words. While other people forget a cold reply in 10 minutes, they keep the emotional meaning of that moment far longer than you think. That does not mean they are weak. It means they are paying attention on a deeper level. Every conversation, every delay, every dismissive answer, every time they had to carry the emotional weight alone, all of it gets filed away inside. And because they do not always complain in real time, other people make the biggest mistake of all. They assume silence means nothing happened. But silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes it means the mind is recording everything. Sometimes it means the heart is trying to understand before it decides what to do. And by the time that understanding becomes clear, the distance has already begun. The first shift usually starts with emotional overload, and this part is easy to miss because it rarely looks dramatic. It does not arrive like a storm. It builds like pressure. A small letdown here. A missed moment there. A time they needed warmth and got indifference instead. A moment when they opened up and felt unheard. A day when your mood decided the tone of the connection and they adjusted again just to keep things calm. None of these moments look huge by themselves. That is why most people brush them off. Life is busy. People are imperfect. Everybody has bad days. And yes, that is true. But emotional overload is not created by one mistake. It is created by the repeated weight of many small moments that were never repaired. At first, they excuse it. They tell themselves, you are tired, stressed, distracted, overwhelmed. They try to see the best in you. They try to be fair. They try to keep the connection stable. But while they are doing that, the emotional load keeps growing. Quietly, deeply, consistently. They keep absorbing, keep understanding, keep giving room until one day there is no room left. And when that point comes, they do not always explode. Sometimes they simply stop reaching, stop leaning in, stop explaining the same hurt in different words. That is the beginning of the silent exit, and most people still think everything is normal. This is where people get confused because they are waiting for obvious warning signs. They expect confrontation if the pain is real. They expect arguments if the bond is in danger. They expect tears, anger, sharp words, or some clear emotional scene that proves the connection is breaking. But emotional overload often creates the opposite effect. Instead of getting louder, the person gets quieter. Instead of demanding more, they begin to expect less. Instead of fighting for understanding, they start protecting their peace. Their messages may still come, but they feel lighter. Their warmth may still be there, but it is thinner now. Their words are present, yet something underneath them is gone. And if you are only listening to what is said, you will miss what is no longer being offered. This is why so many people say, I had no idea. The signs were there, but they were subtle, not noisy, not theatrical, just a slow reduction in emotional availability. They stopped bringing their full self to the connection because bringing their full self had become too expensive. Watch that closely because this is one of the biggest truths in emotional dynamics. People rarely vanish in the moment they are hurt the most. Very often, they vanish after they have been hurt too many times to believe another explanation will change anything. Then another quiet force starts doing its work in the background, and this part is even more powerful. Pattern recognition. Some people do not judge you by one bad day. They do not define you by one late reply, one distant mood, one careless sentence, or one mistake under pressure. They give grace. They give context. They leave room for human flaws. But the brain is always connecting dots, even when no one is speaking about it. It notices what keeps repeating. It notices who goes cold when emotions get serious. It notices who becomes available only when it is easy. It notices who asks for understanding but struggles to give it back. It notices the cycle. And once enough moments line up, a picture starts forming. Not based on your promises, but based on your pattern. This is the part many people never think about. You may believe you are being judged for one incident, when in reality you are being understood through repetition. That one silent dinner was not the issue. That one dismissive answer was not the issue. That one broken promise was not the whole issue. The issue was that each new moment started sounding like an old one. And once someone sees that your behavior follows a pattern, their attachment changes. Not all at once, not with an announcement, but slowly, because reliability is the glue of emotional safety. When the glue weakens again and again, the bond does not snap loudly, it fades. And once that internal model becomes stable, your words begin to lose power. You can explain yourself. You can say you care. You can promise that things will be different. You can insist nothing is wrong. But when your behavior keeps repeating the same emotional message, words start feeling lighter than air. This is why some people seem calm while they are pulling away. They are no longer reacting to your intentions. They are reacting to your consistency. They are no longer listening only to what you mean. They are looking at what you repeatedly create. That shift changes everything. Because the relationship is no longer being measured by hope. It is being measured by evidence. And evidence is hard to argue with when it has been building for months. This is where distance begins to feel less like a temporary mood and more like a clear conclusion. They stop being surprised by the same pattern. They stop feeling confused by the same letdown. They stop waiting for a different result from the same cycle. And when surprise disappears, a certain kind of emotional energy disappears with it. Curiosity fades. Hope softens. The inner effort to keep believing gets tired. If this feels uncomfortably true, keep listening, because the next part is where the connection starts changing, even when both people are still technically in each other's lives. Trust usually does not break the way movies teach people to expect. It is not always one huge betrayal, one shocking lie, one unforgettable moment that changes everything in a single night. Sometimes trust erodes through tiny emotional cuts that look harmless from the outside. A moment when they needed comfort and got logic instead. A moment when something important to them was treated like it was too small to matter. A moment when they showed vulnerability and felt that you were present physically but absent emotionally. These things are easy to forget if you are not the one carrying the feeling of them. But for the person experiencing them, each one becomes a data point inside the heart. A small answer to a bigger question. Am I safe here? Am I seen here? Can I relax here? Can I trust this person with the tender parts of me? Or do I always have to shrink, explain, and translate myself just to be understood? That is how trust often changes. Not through one giant crack, but through dozens of nearly invisible fractures. And once enough of those fractures collect, your presence no longer feels the same. Nothing huge may have changed outside. You may still laugh together. You may still talk. You may still share routines. But inside, the emotional meaning of your presence has shifted. It no longer feels fully safe. And when emotional safety drops, attachment starts thinning whether anyone talks about it or not. What makes this so difficult is that this inner shift is almost impossible to detect if you are only looking for dramatic signs. Trust can be quietly rewritten while the relationship still looks alive from the outside. They still answer, they still show up, they still keep the peace. but they are not feeling the same closeness they once felt. That change is silent, and silence is easy to misread. You think there is no issue because there is no scene. You think things are fine because there is no open conflict. But inside them, the emotional map is changing. Where they once saw comfort, they now see caution. Where they once felt ease, they now feel effort. Where they once moved toward you naturally, they now hesitate a little more each time. And hesitation matters, because hesitation is often the first sign that the nervous system no longer experiences the connection as fully safe. The person may not even announce this to themselves in clear words. They may simply feel less open, less excited, less willing to invest at the same depth. Their energy begins to pull back before their actions do. This is why the ending feels mysterious to the other side. The emotional departure started long before the visible departure. By the time the outside changes, the inside has already been changing for a very long time. And if you miss that, the silence later feels like it came out of nowhere. It did not. It only became visible at the end. After that comes one of the quietest and most important stages of all: silent detachment. This is the stage almost nobody notices while it is actually happening. From your point of view, the relationship may still seem intact. You still talk. You still have shared habits. You still have access. Nothing looks broken enough to trigger alarm. But under the surface, the emotional current is weakening. First, their reactions soften. Things that once lit them up no longer create the same spark. Then their expectations begin to lower. Not because they suddenly want less, but because expecting the same level of care now hurts more than preparing for less. That is a painful truth people rarely say out loud. Lowering expectations is often not peace. It is self-defense in slow motion. Then their engagement starts changing. The conversations become shallower. The emotional risk they take with you becomes smaller. The depth becomes selective. The warmth becomes measured. They are still there, but they are no longer arriving with the same open heart. And because these changes happen in tiny degrees, they are easy to normalize. You tell yourself they are busy. You assume the vibe is temporary. You blame stress, timing, workload, life. And sometimes those things are real. But sometimes what you are calling a phase is actually the slow final stage of emotional detachment. Most people miss it because they are waiting for a dramatic turning point. What they do not understand is that the turning point may have happened internally weeks or months earlier. This is the part that stings the most when people finally look back. They realize they were not watching the beginning of the exit. They were only watching the final proof of a decision already made inside. That is why it feels sudden. Not because it was sudden for them, but because you arrived late to a process that had been unfolding in silence. And once someone reaches that place, their behavior becomes more controlled. They stop trying to pull big conversations out of you. They stop chasing clarity from someone whose pattern already feels clear. They stop investing the same emotional energy where the return keeps shrinking. This is not always coldness. It is often fatigue mixed with wisdom. It is the moment a person sees the difference between connection and depletion, between loyalty and self-abandonment, between patience and endless waiting. And once they see that clearly, they begin stepping back in very practical ways. They share less. They reveal less. They depend less. They dream less inside the bond. They may still be kind. They may still care, but the deep emotional thread that once made the connection feel alive is already loosening. Here is the retention point most people need to hear. If someone becomes quieter, calmer, and less emotionally demanding, that does not always mean the relationship is more secure. Sometimes it means they are already leaving without making a sound. Then comes the last deep shift, and this one changes the whole system. Self-protection. At a certain point, the heart gets tired of carrying what the connection keeps costing. Not just sadness, not just disappointment. A deeper exhaustion, mental, emotional, nervous system exhaustion. The kind that comes from always adjusting, always understanding, always giving the benefit of the doubt, always trying to preserve peace while your own inner balance keeps getting drained. When that goes on too long, something inside begins to turn. The focus is no longer on saving the relationship. The focus becomes saving the self. This is not revenge. It is not cruelty. It is not some dramatic emotional punishment. It is the brain and body deciding that enough instability has been felt. In connection mode, a person keeps trying. They explain, they forgive, they reinterpret your behavior kindly. They stay available. They hope. But in protection mode, the same explanations stop landing. The same promises feel weaker. The same cycles feel heavier. The mind starts asking a different question now. Not, how do I make this work? But how do I stop this from hurting me again? That question changes everything. Because once emotional safety becomes the priority, the relationship is no longer being evaluated by history, chemistry, or potential. It is being evaluated by impact. And if your presence has become linked to stress, confusion, inconsistency, or emotional exhaustion, withdrawal begins to feel less like loss and more like survival. This is why the final move is often so quiet. People expect one last confrontation, one last deep talk, one final list of wounds, some dramatic closing scene where every hidden feeling is explained clearly. But self-protection does not always speak in long speeches. Sometimes self-protection simply closes the door and steps back. The person stops trying to be understood by someone who had many chances to notice. They stop reopening pain just to prove it was real. They stop asking for effort where effort always feels delayed. And because they are no longer operating from hope, they do not always feel the need to create a final emotional event. They withdraw. Not always because they stopped caring, but because caring has become too costly. That difference matters. A lot of people think silence means indifference. Not always. Sometimes silence means I can no longer afford the emotional price of staying where I am not safe. That is a much deeper kind of ending, and because it is rooted in inner survival, it often looks clean from the outside. Almost too clean. No chaos, no scene, no spectacle, just less access, less energy, less response. Then one day, almost nothing at all. And the person on the other side feels shocked because they were waiting for noise as a warning sign. But the warning sign was not noise. It was the long, quiet reduction of emotional presence. When the final distance becomes visible, people often replay everything and search for one exact moment that ruined it. One sentence, one mistake, one fight, one missed call, one clear cause they can point to and say that was it. But real emotional endings are often more layered than that. It was not one moment. It was the build-up, the pattern, the repeated feeling of being alone in a connection that still looked alive. The repeated need to explain simple emotional needs. The repeated shrinking of one person while the other remained comfortable. The repeated hope that next time would feel different. And when that hope finally runs out, the departure becomes easy to misunderstand. It looks cold, but it was usually preceded by a long period of feeling too much. It looks sudden, but it was usually prepared in silence. It looks unfeeling, but it was usually born from feeling too deeply for too long without enough safety in return. That is why people often notice too late. The end did not arrive with thunder. It arrived like dusk. The light simply kept lowering until the room was dark, and by the time you realized the brightness was gone, night had already settled in. Most people do not lose the connection in the last moment. They lose it in all the smaller moments they thought would not matter. So what should someone take from all of this? Not fear, not guilt for every imperfect moment. Not the idea that one wrong move destroys everything. Human relationships are messy. People miss each other. People fail each other. People misunderstand, get tired, get distracted, and fall short. That is part of being human. But what matters is whether repair exists, whether consistency exists, whether emotional effort is mutual, whether someone feels safe enough not only to stay but to stay open, because that is the real issue. The problem is not imperfection. The problem is repeated disconnection without repair. The problem is making one person carry the emotional intelligence of the relationship alone. The problem is assuming that if they are still there, they must still feel the same. Never assume that. Presence is not always proof of connection. Sometimes people remain physically present while emotionally preparing to leave. If you understand that, you understand something powerful. Bonds do not survive on words alone. They survive on reliable care, emotional safety, honesty, and patterns that make the nervous system relax instead of brace. And if that truth lands with you, then you already understand the heart of this message. People like this do not disappear because they are unstable. They disappear because at some point, clarity becomes stronger than attachment and peace becomes more important than staying where love keeps costing too much. And that is the final truth. When someone leaves this way, it is rarely because they woke up one morning and stopped caring. It is more often because they cared for so long, so deeply and so quietly that the caring itself became heavy. They watched, they processed, they waited, they hoped, they adjusted, they forgave. They tried to read the best into what hurt them, but over time, understanding turned into awareness and awareness turned into clarity. Once that clarity formed, staying no longer felt like love. It felt like depletion. So they chose distance, quietly, completely, without the performance people expect from endings. If this changed the way you see silence, then hold on to that. Because the loud endings are not always the most serious ones. Sometimes the most permanent goodbye is the one that arrives without announcement. The one that builds in private. The one that removes emotional access before it removes physical presence. The one that leaves you searching for a final scene that never came. And maybe that is why it hurts so much. Not because there were no signs, but because the signs were soft, slow, and easy to dismiss until they were impossible to ignore. If you have ever felt the shock of someone fading out of your life like this, then you know exactly what this means. And if you are noticing these signs now, do not ignore them. The silence may look small today, but sometimes silence is how the ending starts.